Nabila Ibrahim. I'm the co-executive.
Test.
That's actually pretty good. But then just more and more stuff kept learning experience of running a competition. But yeah, it'll happen. Yeah, no, that's great. That's a good experience. It actually gives you an actual challenge. So the idea is just give you easy and then you realize there's one certain system. Thanks so much. Yeah. Well, that's the you wouldn't have started it if you knew how difficult it was. There was a point where I got so it's almost the necessary prerequisite to be naive about how difficult things are going to be. Nowadays, you have this reality of being able to persevere. Yeah, do this at time. But you're here now. You're already committed to and you realize you can't. Yeah, no, I think that the fact that you put out I was thinking good show. Interesting consulting point. Nobody has reached out and said like, hey, we want to sponsor this logo on expectations that when competition launches, there's some other stuff millions of healthcare and other documents. Probably could find it. There's just all these random opportunities that and of course, inundated with messages. How do I can't do this. Yeah. Have you done that stuff? Yeah, but at the research, talk basically like I put the research track talks, usually different labs. So like quit lab, they have used to be I forget what day it was, like there was a one fight brought something. They're still running, but I think yeah, maybe Tuesdays. But yeah, so I've come back to give like more research talks. Yeah, but not overall. Alright, good to go, Jason. Alright.
Testing, testing. Oh.
There's one up here. Do I have to put it on or is this cool if I just give it in?
Okay, hello everyone. How's everyone doing today? Okay. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Nabila Ibrahim. I'm the co-executive director of Startup Shell, and today we are having a talk with the CTO of Fiscal Note. So just an introduction to Startup Shell if it's anyone's first time being here. Startup Shell is UMD's home for creators, builders, and entrepreneurs. We're a student-run co-working space and startup incubator that provides students with the resources, network, and support to build and scale their startups. So like some of the examples of resources we provide are like, 24/7 access to this amazing space over here in the Idea Factory, 100K in like software resources, and like a network of around like 500, alumni of Startup Show who are like successful founders, and like it's just a great community who's going to support you through your entrepreneurship journey. So if you want to get involved, membership's open at the beginning of every semester. We just closed membership, but you coming here tonight is you being involved. So we hold grind nights every Wednesday. Great time to come and like work on your projects. So that's Startup Shell. We hope to see you come by here more. But Sander, will you be?
I don't need an introduction. I can
Okay,
just roll.
wonderful. Okay, then
Fine.
let's get started.
Yeah. Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Vlad. Nice to meet you all in this way. I'm sure we'll get some chance to talk later. What I wanted to do is quickly go over some things with slides just to make it easier. It'll be a lot more context, high-level things. I'll just run through basically almost every different part of building a startup and how we got to where we are, with the hope that basically generates enough background that we can have our fireside chat and Q&A that you guys can know kind of the things to ask anything that I might be able to comment on. So real quick background. One sec. Where'd this go? All right, on me. Originally, I'm from St. Petersburg in Russia. I moved to basically this area a while back, grew up around the area. Then went to undergrad in New York, where I started to get into computer science. Philosophy as well, so I doubled in philosophy, but I figured just because I like arguing with people doesn't make a living. And so I needed to get into something where I can build systems that actually do the arguing for me. So I got into NLP, to natural language processing, building machine learning systems that could process language in some way pretty early on in undergrad. And then I came here to Maryland for grad school. Philip Resnick was my PhD advisor. Worked on a lot of different problems across NLP, co-reference, natural language, kind of a problem of identifying things, sentiment analysis, stance detection. Machine translation was the big one that we were funded for a lot of things. So my PhD dissertation was on translation. If you're familiar with BERT, bidirectional kind of transformer encoder that Jacob Devlin developed, Jacob Devlin went here as well. And then he went to BBN Technologies. I went there and worked with him for a while. Worked on some of the first neural translation language models back in, 2013. And then he went to Microsoft and Google and developed BERT. And I worked in a few other places, and then in 2013, basically came to Fiscal Note, which we'll talk a lot more about. While I've been at Fiscal Note, I've been lucky enough to also join the boards or advisory boards for a number of different startups that are now in the pre-seed to Series B stages in a bunch of different industries. So I've seen the experience from Fiscal Note of building it from the ground up, of joining as the 9th employee and going from where we are to where we are now. And then being on the journey for a bunch of other startups that I'm happy to talk about, as well as you'll see, a number of other things that we've done. So I joined Fiscal Note in 2013. I was the first machine learning scientist. It was basically a back-end engineer, front-end engineer, and me. And I built out a lot of the first machine learning kind of data science capabilities. And then over the years, started to grow. I became a manager of the data science team. Then started to manage a couple different teams, data science, analytics. Then started to manage other managers across our whole data operations platform, which we'll talk about in a second. And then over the last couple years, we've become highly acquisitive. So we've acquired, like 15 other companies in the last couple years. So I became essentially the lead for those. So I had a couple CEOs reporting to me. And then as we reorganized, now I'm the global CTO with about 150 to 200 people that I lead across the different parts of the organization in different product lines. We, as you see, went from that, which is the entire company at the time, to in August, we IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange, which is something that you don't think about when you're here. Here you're just thinking about when you're going to do a Costco run and get ramen. And here you're thinking about how the hell did we get here? And so what I wanted to open up basically is discussion on this whole journey. And I'll talk a little bit about what Fiscal Note does, so you have a context about kind of things that I'm comfortable talking about and not comfortable. But really, it's open to anything. So along the way, I was involved in every single one of our raises from seed to, Series F IPO. I'm the main lead for all the technical due diligence from all the investors you see here, plus a bunch you don't, as well as all the due diligence for the acquired companies we did, so diving into their tech stacks and understanding things that they do and where their moats are. So what does Fiscal Note do? So just at a very high level, what we try to do is solve the problem for our customers of understanding what's going on in the political, financial, kind of risk world, where they want to answer two questions. What's going on today across all sorts of local to federal regulatory legislative news changes, and what can they do about it? And if that sounds like a very niche problem, it's not. For most companies, this is one of the biggest problems that they have. So right after customers and developing their products, most companies will cite regulatory government intervention of some sort, whether it's positive or usually negative, as one of the biggest factors in preventing them from doing business or preventing them from doing the kind of business they want, or from helping them do business. So what we try to do is help our customers understand from basically every single level of government what is happening, who's involved, and what they can do about it. And so just a kind of an overview of the kinds of customers we have. So what companies does this affect? Again, everyone. So most government agencies are clients of ours, because as you would expect, parts inside the government don't really know what other parts inside the government are doing, so they need us to help bridge those gaps. So from every part of Congress to the White House to most agencies, they're consuming our products in some form or another, whether it's data directly, whether it's editorial content that we're writing, whether it's analysis that we're automatically producing. And the kinds of people at the companies that we work with that buy our products or use them, as you would probably guess, are related to legal, compliance, government affairs in some way, broadly trying to understand how their company is exposed and then what they can do about it. So I'll start with the interfaces just to give a better sense of what this looks like, and then I'll dive into more of the back-end side, again, at a high level. But I think it always makes sense to understand the context of what the user is going to see to solve the problem, and then we can go into how we actually solve it. So there's, like I said, a number of different products we have. All of them are software as a service solutions where there's subscriptions that people are buying a license to, or packages of licenses. There are a couple things we do outside of the paywall, so roll call fact-based, which you might have seen, because John Oliver usually cites it for like Trump falling stuff. Those are in front of the paywall, but everything else, there's a subscription that you subscribe to on a monthly, annual basis. We're a heavily document-based platform, so we scrape 50,000 sources, millions of documents, basically a week usually, coming out of all the different places in government, news, social media. And so there's a lot of views of documents with metadata that we derive, which I'll talk about in a second. There's a lot of map views, so we're trying to detect risk behavior. So I just think if there's anomalies in any kind of activity across the world, through online activity or through any kind of other risk tracking that we do. We also run, if you ever participated in any campaigns where Planned Parenthood or some other organization asks you to write an email or call a congressman, we power a lot of those sites. We send close to 1 billion messages a year from people like you to Congress. We also power the other side. So we power the content management system that the Congress and other state houses are using to receive those messages, respond to them, and understand what their constituents are saying. So we power a lot of congressional websites, offices that run receiving those messages, who sends those messages and how. And then we have a couple other kinds of offerings. We have an automatic data labeling offering where, if you're familiar with Scale.ai or other companies that kind of have human-in-the-loop labeling of other kinds of data, human kind of labels for text or images. We have alternative data marketplaces for finance, where we're aggregating a lot of different kinds of alternative data, like credit card transaction, other things, and providing that back to different institutions. We have a lot of dashboards of other things. If you're rating yourself on ESG metrics, like what your coal power distribution looks like or where your employees are based, we collect a lot of that data and try to infuse it back to help you file regulatory filings on what you're doing there. And then just a lot of editorial content. So our business is made up of technology teams, which I lead, and then a lot of analysis and editorial teams, which do a lot more human intelligence and inferential work on top of what we can provide automatically. So what does that look like at a high level underneath? So like I said, we collect a lot of data, 50,000 or so sources, probably growing pretty constantly across the internet. So imagine there's a state, local, city council website where maybe in Seattle, they're proposing a ban on facial recognition. So for a lot of companies, they would want to know that pretty immediately. So we're going to that site constantly. We're getting things from 15,000 or so municipal city council level sites, for instance, on what's on their agenda, who's saying it, what are they talking about, to immediately take that document, parse it out, what companies are mentioned. It might be relevant to Southwest, let's say, or Uber? If it is, maybe you want to send them an alert that there's something going on in this locality that they would want to pay attention to. Maybe it's a tax on recycling bags. Maybe it's housing subsidies. So every different kind of company has some sort of exposure to different changes in all these laws they want to get ahead of. So we're constantly getting information from those sites every day. So we're running a pretty big ingestion engine for a lot of unstructured document data. We're also collecting videos, multimedia, other kind of content, images, as well as tracking social media and news sites. So hundreds of thousands of news sites, millions of articles that we're trying to parse out. Again, what companies are mentioned, how are they mentioned, is it good or bad, what the topic is, automatically analyzing all of that. And so that's basically just to get data from the outside world, the source data, into our systems. So once we get that data into our systems, that's where most of our other AI kinds of comes in. So my PhD is in, like I said, basically AI kinds of development. The first teams I ran and the data science capabilities we have are for enabling us to parse out a lot of data from all of these documents. So we're using every set of tools that you can imagine, homegrown, off the shelf. We're working with companies like OpenAI, using PyTorch, other kinds of tools, as well as oftentimes some of the simplest things that you could possibly do, build a nice linear regression for a simple problem that doesn't require much work. So across the board, we're taking these documents that we have from news to legislation, regulation, social media, and trying to connect them in some way. And essentially, that's the knowledge graph that we're building. So if a news article mentions Uber and they mention some sort of ban on ride sharing, there might be another social media post, there might be a piece of legislation, all related to that. From the customer's perspective, they don't care it occurs in all these different documents. All they care about is that I have an issue that I need to deal with and figure out what the impact to my company is going to be. And so everything we're building is enabling that. So we're parsing out every single mention, again, of people, places, locations. We're getting the topics. We have several different topic taxonomies that we're trying to classify everything into. Is it related to bankruptcy, indigenous people, all sorts of any kinds of issues, thousands of different topics that we've correlated with relation to a given industry, and then trying to deliver that through these different interfaces that we have that I showed you in some way. So that's kind of the high level of what we're trying to do. Again, I rushed through that just to give a sense of what we can all talk about in a second. And why would anyone want to use this? Again, there's three kind of main use cases. The first is discovery. There's something that people don't know about the world that they want to know what's going on. And so there's a lot of search that we're powering using Elastic and other things, trying to get as much data into there as possible. A lot of metadata we're doing, recommendation engines, trying to push information as we learn about users. We're trying to help them plan by identifying places where, again, there's something emerging that they could work together. So we have a lot of workflow tools on our platforms, like I talked about, like the website building or the editing or the receiving of messages. And then reporting, which is probably one of the least interesting, but the most useful for a lot of people, is being able to report out what they're doing at work to someone else to show them that there actually is value from the job that they're doing. And so that's kind of what FiscalNote does in a nutshell. Let me stop there, and I think we can transition to a chat or any kind of Q&A that we could talk about. Sure.
Yeah, I was curious to know, you guys are all across the place because, the data pipeline you built is just so powerful. But since you're there from the start, how did FiscalNote decide what industry you wanted to go into?
What industry we wanted to go into?
Yeah, because it's all across the board, right? So how did your sales team decide, hey, let's start?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me back up. I think our vision has always been actually very consistent, even though the products have evolved. So the tagline when I joined was unlock open data and make it useful. It evolved into a little bit more finessed, connect the world to their governments, and now I think it's evolved a little bit further. But in fact, the mission was always consistent. It's very difficult for people to understand, people meaning everyone really, you, me, but also companies, what's going on in the government and how it's going to affect them. And so that's the industry. Now, the execution tactically of that, what we want to do today, that's a good question. Like, how do you decide what your foothold is going to be in order to enter in a place where the competitors are not going to eat you up alive immediately? That's, I see a problem with a lot of other companies. And so we entered in the state tracking market. So we started with specifically tracking things that are going on at the state level. Not local, not federal. Local was not large enough, and it was a high distribution tail of, there's like I said, 15,000 different sites. Federal, there's so much already existing technology on. Thomson Reuters, LexisNexis had that market pretty well covered. We thought state has a really good opportunity. Where did that come from? Well, our founder, Tim, had a lot of experience, again, at the state level kind of government, so he felt that pain, and he could talk to it pretty well with investors, and as he's selling the vision to us to be able to represent, that's a good opportunity. That doesn't necessarily translate to sales immediately, but that's kind of the provenance of where we wanted to focus, and then we built up a moat from there on. Sure, and then you and you, so forth.
Did you have to build relationships with data aggregators for potentially proprietary information that may not be available to public means? And if so, what exactly was the process of building those relationships like?
Yeah, so we try to get as much open data as possible. If it's publicly available, it helps on a lot of different fronts. But that doesn't mean that the webmasters, the hosts, and other people that are hosting that public information are happy with us. And so we are often the highest traffic consumer of most city council websites, other places that you can imagine that don't really get a lot of traffic, except for us. So if we ran our scrapers like 5 times every hour, we bring down their site. So we have to have a relationship with them to be a courteous citizen and a consumer of their resources. Sometimes they will give us access to their FTP or API if they have one that is not publicly available, but they would prefer us to use that instead of hitting their site, which we prefer as well. That makes it much easier for us. That's just the open public domain use case. Now there's the weirdness of the laws in the US where actual laws are copyrighted by companies. So I don't know if you know this, but Maryland's laws are copyrighted by LexisNexis, I think. So if you want to use them for any commercial purposes, you actually have to pay a certain license fee. And there's a couple states like that. There's ongoing case law to like basically push that aside because that's weird. But we do have to have relationships with some places to actually have a license fee where we're using their data, even if we collect it ourselves, in any commercial purposes. There's also things like news, social media. So this is a good back out to build-buy decisions. Like when do you want to build something on your own? When do you want to buy something that's available? So you could certainly put together your own scraper for RSS feeds on news sites and use a free like aggregator if someone already built one. And that's probably the best solution. So there are then paid versions of those aggregators, or there's other things that you could do. I think the question is, when do you want to have a moat around something that you do? When is it important? Where you want to spend your time? And when is it better just to farm it out to someone else? So if there are data sets that are hard to get, that have this long tail distribution where like it takes a lot of time to get each one, but there's a ton of them, and each one of them individually doesn't add that much value, we would prefer to have a partner that mostly does that work, unless we consider it a moat, in which case we have some of those in-house that we do, because it's just something that we think is proprietary to us.
So you're managing this kind of very large amount of data sources, and for each of your products, you have different algorithms and methods to like calculate those things from those data sources. The amount is kind of frustrating to me, like even to imagine how much amount you're trying to do. Like from your perspective, going through all those 8 years of development, how can you manage this kind of frustration of having probably hundreds of tools, hundreds of algorithms, and hundreds of data sources?
I guess it's a matter of perspective. I'm happy that we're around to have that frustration, right? That's the first answer. Obviously, that's just a throwaway. So as you grow, inevitably you have tech debt that you accumulate. I'll go with that kind of direction. So first product we built was very much duct tape and glue to try to get something out real quick. The way that we handle data, the way that we handled the scrapers, the semantic and the syntactic connection between like the values in the data that we're getting and the actual scrapers were very tight. There were a lot of dumb decisions we made to get to market as quickly as possible. As you grow, you have to trade off how much product roadmap space is taken up by people asking for things, and usually with revenue associated with them or retention implications, versus the technical desires that I might have on how well structured I would like this to be. And as you grow, those decisions become more difficult because there's higher opportunity costs on each side. So the way I deal with that frustration is mostly, well, I guess a couple things. One, how much drag is it on my team to be able to do the work that they need to do every day to add value by the existence of the tech debt that we're talking about. So there comes a time when adding in a new data set or being able to answer a question like what is the quality of the data set, like for instance that we're serving today, becomes a chore. Like it's much more difficult than it needs to be. If you've gotten to that point, that probably means that you need to set aside time to fix it. But if you haven't gotten to that point, it might not be the most high priority thing because there's probably 10 other things that are being on that high priority list that are frustrating you. And so it's being cognizant of what you should prioritize at any given time, and that tech debt, along with product development that's customer focused, along with the, I guess just future kind of proofing of like, we're working on ideas that are moonshot, kind of how to mesh those together in a roadmap. And that's the best way to, I think, treat that frustration. Maybe I'll tie in another answer, which is a learning. Coming from the technical side, I would love to think that the technology itself is the differentiator of what your company is able to provide. That if you have the best technology, you're going to win, right? You're going to get mixed sales. You're going to grow. I mean, I think that this chart is a good counterexample to that. Most of those are VC-backed companies that had a lot more aspiration than the outcome that they were able to achieve. Some of those technologies are much better than anything I think we built right here, if I'm honest. But they didn't click. They didn't solve the right problem. They didn't have the right sales motion. They didn't have the right innovation in the actual bringing the end-to-end solution to market. And so you have to learn that. Basically, temper the technical frustration to, is it actually preventing us from achieving our next goal as a company? If it is, if it's that drag on the team, if it really is becoming an issue, you should absolutely focus on it. If it's not, even though it's frustrating to the team, aligning around the mission of growing the company together is probably the way to get out of it. I know that took it a bit of a different direction than you probably intended, but hopefully that answers your question.
I think you mentioned in your PhD you did a lot of work related to parsing, for example, with Professor Leslie, and that this was useful for you when you started out the company. I guess my question is, did you have any issues with the IP concerning those methods? And I guess towards the end, I think I saw a couple patents on your Google Scholar page. Are those related at all with the university?
No. So is the question, how much did my work at Maryland interfere with any work that I did at Fiscal?
Sure.
The answer is not at all. I guess maybe two parts to that answer. One, when you join a company, usually there's a IP non-disclosure agreement, you basically sign something. So this is just, I guess, a non sequitur life learning. In all my advisor agreements and in my company agreements, I specifically call out any work I did prior to that or ongoing in other places that is excluded from the IP agreement I'm signing. So in FiscalNote's case, anything I did at Maryland is explicitly excluded in the IP agreement so that FiscalNote cannot claim any ownership of anything that I did. Same thing with any advisor agreements I sign, anything I do there is explicitly excluded. The patents, second part of the answer, are all part of FiscalNote. So one of the things that I lead is our patenting strategy. So I could talk at length about that. That could be a whole talk in itself. Software patents are a weird game people play. Most of them are not actually that defensible in court. I'll cite a random statistic. 70% will fail if you take software patents to court. But the reason that people have them are, twofold. One, others have them, and so you need the defensibility. If someone comes at you with other patents, it's a very easy game to lose if there's nothing else that you can put up front. And then second, there are actually valuable IP things that you can do and create a moat or a fence around in that way. So again, to your question, like there's the technology you build, there's the sales, marketing, go-to-motion, and there's the legal part of building a company. There's also the financial part. So like, this kind of growth is obviously very financially engineered, right? And so IP is a really valuable tool in certain ways to mostly, I would say, kind of defensively protect yourself. But it certainly helps in series fundraising to have patents on your work because that is a differentiation to the VCs. And it helps in sales motion because clients often are looking for, especially if government clients, but even corporate clients are looking for a way to say like, hey, I'm going to write a proposal, an RFP for a certain product. I want to bake it in that you're going to be the winner. but it helps if I can say there's patents or there's other proprietary things you're doing in this proposal that I'm writing. That makes sense? Cool.
This might be a little more technical, but like with a lot of different data sources that aggregate data comes in like a ton of formats, how did you manage that when you were like starting out? Was it difficult to just be able to effectively parse data in the first place?
Yeah, all the time. So if you're familiar with the Alice in Wonderland quote, I think the Queen says, here you have to run twice as fast just to stay still. Something along those lines. Anyone familiar with that? No, it's okay. So if you build the app side, like our application developers, like you basically build something. There's probably some bugs there, but it's stable. You can run it. Don't really have to maintain it that much. With data, there's a constant maintenance load. Like the data sources constantly change, so the websites update. They don't tell us they're going to update. This is when we have a good relationship. They tell us we're going to launch, but almost never. And so the scrapers break. And like you said, they upload data in all sorts of file formats, CSVs, documents, baked PDFs, where it's essentially an image file, crooked sideways with a bunch of splattered dots on it. So we have to figure out how to deal with all those things. And that's a constant challenge. So I would say Pareto principle applies at the very beginning. You try to get as much from like 80% of the work as you can, and kind of try to ignore, again, the long tail and not get too caught up in it unless you absolutely have to, unless that's where like customers are looking. In most cases, customers will see a few things. They're not going to see the long tail. So you will know it's there, but not necessarily everyone. And then you kind of start knocking it out. So are there ways, especially now that the tools are much better for this, there's tools almost at every part of the data stack. There's the kind of like data cataloging tools of like where are my sources and what am I getting from. There's the kind of like feature stores and provenance tools where you're extracting some things. So measure quality. Basically, like as data comes in, we have a couple things that we're trying to do immediately. Trying to see like, is this real or is it not, like text-wise? Like we can see if there's garbled characters. We can see if it's like images or PDFs or other things. And so we can quickly knock out like a quick check. And if it's not, there's human-in-the-loop interventions at different points in the pipeline that we've built over time. And there's different points where we want someone to be able to review it and kick it out if it didn't meet the quality checks that we built in. So we have this dashboard. We see like, okay, the last time we got data from this source is 10 minutes ago. We got 150 fields from this document, and this document updated, and then like X number of fields from it failed. And so we built up these over time, but again, we focused on the things that we found people at first reported to us and, hey, this is a problem, and we started to build those checks back into the system. And so now we have a whole slew of checks, validations, normalizations that it goes through, a dashboard that's internally facing that the team uses, the engineering team, data engineering team, dashboard that's externally facing to our clients, our like internal clients, our like non-technical people like our customer success team, our BD team. So they're aware of what's going on. And then there's the overall kind of product that clients are using themselves. So I can dive into any part of that, but it was definitely an evolution. At first, you start with the simplest thing and then kind of take it from there. Sure.
So you kind of talked about your involvement and also not only some of the funding rounds, but also in some of the acquisitions you guys made. Can you talk about like your methodology, not only for vetting a company, because you mentioned some of them had bigger aspirations they may not necessarily reach, but why were then they a fit to be acquired by Fiscal?
Yeah, we thought they were really good at what they were doing. They just didn't click on all cylinders, right? Like they might have been missing a piece that we thought we had that we could add for them. Oftentimes, most often, it's the go-to-market piece. What I mean by that is a sales staff, understanding of what their value proposition is to a client, sometimes who the client is, and then we have a fairly significant sales staff. So let me go back for a second. So back in 2013, I mean, we were in the usual kind of startup talks, accelerators. Like we saw a lot of companies in that crop, the 2013, 14 kind of like similar crop as us, rising from the pre-seed to seed. I think one of the things that was pretty clear immediately was a lot of them were much heavier on the technology side than we were. So our employee distribution was, I would say, let's say 50% tech, 50% non-tech. For most companies at that stage, it was like 90% tech, 95% tech. And so what ended up happening for almost all those companies is almost none of them are around anymore. Some of them got acquired. Some of them completely failed. I think that it's one of the lessons I've taken is you have to have a good distribution understanding of, again, like how you're going to grow. And so if you build the best thing, which some of these I would say did, but didn't have a way to actually get it out to the market, didn't think about how they're going to monetize, that was what kind of was the end of their runway. So basically they had a year, they had 2 years of runway, right? That was ending. they were trying to raise a round. There wasn't enough growth to validate a VC's investing further into their growth, right? But we found that their technology was really valuable. They had something unique, and we had a good fit that would actually bring that and compound the value. So compounding the value is probably one of the better ways to say it. And our hypothesis has been pretty true. So we have a good playbook now where we integrate backend systems, the usual stuff, legal, HR, et cetera. Then we integrate our sales teams. And then the last is the integration of products where it makes sense. But we get most of the value immediately by being able to integrate kind of the sales efforts, especially if they don't have sales motions, which a number of them didn't at all. It's just not something that they thought was needed, right? But we've kind of, I think, had a good balance in both of those places. So again, it's not that they were bad companies or bad products, not even bad timing necessarily. That could certainly be the case in some. But I think it's just that they were unable to get the funding they needed to get to the point where they would really hit it off. And we thought that was a good fit for us. And I should mention culture too. So I think that the way that we evaluate startups is, yes, we look at the financials and all the different metrics, but really it's people, right? Like you're getting people to join your company. And I think that some of the best people that we have today actually came through an acquisition. So of the majority of the people that report to me, like the VPs that report to me, were actually CEOs or CTOs of the acquisitions that came in. They're no longer leading those teams, and they're leading a different or broader set of their organization or just different roles. But they are contributing much more to the company now than they, I think, were even if we stayed in that role that they were in. And so I think just we look for a good cultural fit where people have a lot to offer, and they might not be able to offer it completely in the current roles and companies that they're in. And so another question you could ask is, how do we decide to keep these companies around as a standalone company as opposed to integrate them or as opposed to deprecate and take some of their clients? And that is a business decision in some cases. So we do merge and kind of transfer clients from one platform to another, maybe deprecate that product, right? But for the most part, we've actually thought each one is a unique expansion of our total addressable market, although some of the people in them have a broader role they can play now. I thought I saw a hand over here. No, sure.
You kind of briefly mentioned this as you're talking, but the way that information is conveyed on the web in 2013 probably looks very different to the way it is now, especially with new forms of media like Twitter, per se. How do you imagine that impacting your company? And what are you guys doing to address that?
When you say new forms of information, you mean new platforms where information is coming together? Like,
I would say it'd be more common back then, I assume, that a bunch of information would be on these separate different government websites and whatnot. But now more and more often people have Twitter accounts that they're posting up these things. I guess has that replaced those websites that you were primarily using for scraping?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I think that there are newer social media platforms. I don't think that there are or have been a replacement for the primary source websites that we're primarily dealing with. So, we are that in some ways. Like, we are the aggregator for local policies. Like, there isn't a place you can go to. Even Google doesn't index some of the sites that we index as part of our local kind of offerings. Like, we're tracking those 15,000 or so. I think it's every place that has a population of 2,000 people or more, right? And so there's no single place where that's come together. There are companies that actually build those things. So Granicus was one, Socrata was another. And so sometimes you could argue that if a company, that it's a GovTech company, right, that works with the states or the local places and builds it, they could offer that as an aggregated kind of set of content. And that might be a disruptor to us because then you can just go to them. But none of them have gone in that direction. But I think maybe the other part of your question is, are these primary sources as important as they were before? Now that maybe there's a tweet from the president saying he's going to make a certain policy decision, as opposed to you have to go to the congressional record or the federal executive desk to hear about that. So yes, there's, I think, the horizon scanning aspect that we have to add in new sources now that weren't available before. Maybe it's Discord, maybe it's other things that people weren't even using before. But most of our clients are still looking for the primary source that they're going to have to base their other work on, like the legal documents and understanding what's actually in the regulation about some new enforcement action. Cool.
how Google doesn't even index some of the sites that you offer data from.
Yeah, I guess humble brag.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's a lot more data from like niche websites or other data. So how did you guys find this? And how did you find all the data to compile and keep on adding more and more?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you start out with the hypothesis that like this is the set of data that people want. Then as clients come in, they start asking for more things. So if you're, again, successful, you start this flywheel where a client says, hey, can you also get me X or Y? Like, can you cover this other city or state? So one of the things we do for Voter Voice, which is our advocacy product, so we build these websites where anyone, you can go and say, like, who is my legislator? You know, who is my representative? I want to send them a message about topic XYZ and build a campaign around it. For that, we have to have geo files where we're actually building these ArcGIS files of like all the borders of the different places, because there's actually pretty strict laws on like you can't contact people who aren't your actual representative, and that constantly changes. And it's really hard to maintain that. And as you go down to the local level, like we just don't have, no one has all those files. And so as a client comes to us and says like, hey, I want to run a campaign in this area, we say, okay, you know, it'll take 2 weeks. We'll build out the new files and we'll upload it, and like you'll have it available. And it's kind of like, you know, an on-demand model in that long tail. So there's the first part you assume is right, you validate that, and then the long tail is clients coming in and asking for things, right?
I guess similar to a previous question, the technology for actually processing the data has changed since 2013 also, I guess.
Sure.
There's a lot of new research that comes out on like knowledge graphs, just parsing. So I guess how do you stay current, and are there any major technologies that were new since 2013 that you think were kind of critical?
Yeah, well, I mean, not to ride the wave here, but obviously GPT is going to be pretty disruptive in a lot of ways. I think prior to that, there was, you know, waves of things. So like front-end frameworks changed. So the original app was actually in Ruby. Then we went to Node and Ember, then AngularJS. Now we're back to Ruby on Rails in some places. Some are running Angular, some are running Java. So like there's all these different frameworks that you can use for development, right? Different products chose different ones at different times. So you could basically like archaeologically say like we think this product was developed within this 2-year time period by just looking at the tech stack. Most of our products have Python backend with some sort of, you know, Angular front end or some other kind of JS framework. That's not probably what you're asking. Like, you know, you can quickly do that part. The more interesting technology, kind of the generational shift, is probably more of the machine learning, the parsing. Like, how do we extract data? How do we build scrapers? So I don't know so maybe a couple of shifts. So one is low-code and no-code tools. So I think what we're talking about is mostly at the beginning are, you know, software engineers building systems that can scrape data. To another question, I forgot which one. As tools come online that offer non-engineers the ability to get data in the same way, it's cheaper, it's often faster. We don't have to maintain that platform. So we have some low no-code tools that we've built ourselves internally for our non-engineering teams. So we have a professional services, like think kind of a research analyst team, basically point, click, identify places, like, you know, and we have the back end that goes and scrapes it, right? Like, didn't have that in 2013, we have that now. I think that's a pretty good generational shift. It's pushing work that engineers could do before to non-engineers. And that's good in all sorts of ways. And so I see GPT in that same light. It's basically pushing work that used to have certain kinds of skills for, that you can have either a different set of skills for or a different way of approaching the problem. And so we have a lot of, like you said, data aggregation that we've built up in certain ways. We've tried not to make it rigid. It's in some ways trying to be self-healing, like automatically detecting if a link is moved, which link is pointing to a document, which link is pointing to an image, trying to grab that, compare it, you know, like hashing it, seeing if it's something that we got before or not. And so OCR technology, like all the things basically that help us do that, as they evolve, we try to keep up with them. It comes back to, I think, your question, like, is this the critical problem today? Like, is replacing this piece going to unlock the most for us in whatever time span we're talking about? Or is it better to keep it as is, it's working, let's not touch it for a while, and there's a bigger impact project that we could take on in that time?
How did the process of like raising funds from your initial seed round to all the way to like Series F3, like IPO, how did it change across
Yeah, that's a great question. It changes in the expectations that people have of you and what you're able to provide and what they're looking for. So at the beginning, you're selling a vision, right? You're selling a deck. A lot of the companies I work with, if you ask them like, what did you pitch to raise, or like, what did you build to raise your seed? They'll say, we built a deck, right? Like, there's an idea, it's represented in something, but really you're selling yourself as the person who's implementing it. I think that's true through Series A for the most part. You still get investors who are much more interested in the vision of what you're able to offer as opposed to the specifics of the growth pattern and the customer base. Series A, well, the expectations have also changed in the last 10 years. So like, you can't really see these numbers that well, but like our Series A was 13 million. I mean, that's honestly, that could be a seed today. It's a small Series A for a lot of companies. And so people are willing to throw more money in with less diligence, as FTX obviously shows as well. So there's a trade-off there, but I would say still up to there. Series B, you start to have to show like financials. You have your customers. They're looking for, are you able to actually deliver on some reasonable growth numbers that you're able to provide and have a track record of that? Are you managing your money well? Do you have some systems in place internally for tracking like, how people are, like how funds are kind of, allocated in the return on investment? Like you start getting questions like, what's your CAC? What's your LTV? What's your ACV? I can help define those metrics if people care. But you certainly really wouldn't get those at seed at that point. And so people start caring about metrics. And then as you get to, D, E, F, it's almost less about the product and technology and much more about the finances. So are you really well positioned to basically handle a huge influx of cash into your business and not burn it immediately on stupid stuff? Yeah.
What was the decision to go? I mean, like, what was the rationale behind the decision to go public rather than raise an F4? Why did you guys just go public after your Series F?
It's not that easy to go public.
Oh.
Well, why didn't we go public earlier? But no, you've asked the reverse question, right? Why did we choose to go public at all, right?
Yeah, my initial question was why couldn't you go? Like, because I usually have seen a lot of companies that raise their Series F and then they get acquired or something like that.
I think it becomes a lot harder to get acquired once your valuation starts going up pretty significantly. I mean, it becomes a lot harder to get acquired. I think the optimal range of acquiring is like right here. Like you still have that growth potential. Investors are looking at like your product technology. And then once you get past there, I mean, really only a few companies would be willing to acquire at that range. Like, and that's what you hear in the news when there's an acquisition like that, like Salesforce acquiring Slack or something along those lines, like Adobe and Figma. So the question is why didn't we go public earlier? Like I said, it's quite difficult to go public. There's a lot of requirements that you have to satisfy in terms of actually like going through the process. It's actually quite expensive as well to go through the whole roadshow, all the SEC filings, and it's not obviously the right decision, right? Like it's not obvious that you want to go public because it involves a lot more scrutiny on your business. We have our quarterly earnings reports, we have our audits, we have a lot more restrictions on what we can and cannot say. Personally, me, I cannot say a lot of things. So it's definitely not an easy decision, but I guess the position we found ourselves in, it was the best path to take. I think if we, I think it's very easy to talk about counterfactuals, but the result was that we ended up going public when we did for a host of legal, financial, regulatory reasons. Trying to get new people here.
Hi. You mentioned you had a lot of like interfaces. I saw like a dashboard there. Are there any like interesting interfaces that you found that you're particularly proud of?
That we've built?
Yeah.
Yeah, but none of these that are represented here, unfortunately, so I can't point to them. I think that some of the best ones are, for me at least, again, I'll point to my roots, like the data analysis. So I think UX is a skill set in itself, like designing good user interfaces. I think data UX is even like a very much more specific, undervalued skill that very few people product managers, UX, they don't really understand how to present data well. Not to diss on anyone in particular, like it's hard, right? The data is constantly changing. It's not like transactional data where you know exactly what's going to come in. Like we have analysis of, let's say, millions of comments on the FCC net neutrality rule, where we've analyzed like which comments are for, which comments are against, which ones are arguing it's overreaching, which ones are arguing it's like legal obstruction. And so we've done this analysis. We want to present it to a client, and there's millions of data points, and we want to present it in a way that's as easily summarizable as possible, where they can take an action from it. Like it has to be impactful, it has to be actionable. It can't just be like some random thing. So I think news sites are really good at presenting a cool looking diagram. So if you go to like New York Times or Vox, there's like a Sankey diagram, maybe there's like a map, and it's very cool, you can click around, but then you're like, okay, so what? Like, I don't understand what to do with this. So what I'm proud of are some of the visualizations that we've come up with for how to summarize a lot of data quickly so that people actually know, okay, I can take this next action step. Mostly it involves a map. People love maps. In some sort of like core path where it's like highlighting colors of different areas that are lighting up. But the design itself hides some of the complexity of how do we get to the fact that like we've identified these places to highlight that people should go to. Yeah.
Yeah, I did have a question. So it sounds like you started by creating a pitch deck back in 2013. Now that you're a CTO and somebody does present you a pitch deck, what are like the bonehead mistakes? What are the things that make you say like, oh, I want this? Like, what does it look like from your perspective now that you're the CTO listening to somebody's pitch deck?
Sure. It depends on the stage again, for sure. So like when I look at a pre-seed or seed deck, as we put it together to your question, like I'm not expecting really any real numbers presenting like a forecast. Maybe you can throw in a TAM, that's almost expected. Like we think there's a $6 billion TAM in this market. I think that's highly discounted, right? Like it's mostly about, I feel like you have a background in understanding the problem that you're solving, capable of building a team around this, selling the vision, confidence in this being the right thing for you to do for the foreseeable future, and representing it in a way that's kind of easily digestible for me. So like, I don't know that there are bonehead mistakes in that. I think it's false precision, maybe one at that stage, presenting more information that probably makes sense. But just, it's a good story. Like you have to present a good story is what I'm looking for. Does it make sense? Like how you got from what you're presenting to why I'm building a company around it and why now is the right time, right? Like at the very beginning, the real question is now the right time? Because every company you see now, like, I don't know, let's say Instacart, I'll pick it. Like there was a company like that 20 years ago, and they raised a bunch of money and they went out of business because that wasn't the right time. And now it's obviously a multi-billion-dollar company. So then that's there. Once we get a little further along, so most companies I look at a little bit further along, it's, do I think your roadmap is reasonable and achievable? So if you have a roadmap that you're presenting, like we have a product, we have a customer base, we think we're going to grow X, Y, Z numbers in this next year, then I try to match it up and ask, how are you getting to this growth with what you're saying that you're going to do, and why haven't you been able to do that earlier? Like what has prevented you from being able to do that? So presenting, again, unrealistic expectations, like some sort of like L curve shaped up, without actually being able to justify like what's changing in the dynamics of either the market or what you're doing that's going to result in anything changing in how you're operating. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. Deep understanding of the issue, having a vision and clear leadership, seeing all those things in the slide deck, that's gonna be a good thing. So.
Yeah, definitely. For the first stages.
Can you talk about your sales process and generating revenue from like 0 to 10 million, not like the late stage, the first few years?
Sure. Just a lot of luck. So, I mean, I'm half kidding, maybe a quarter kidding. So the honest truth is that you don't know what your sales process is going to be, right? You have to iterate that as well as you're iterating your product. You're basically, everyone is a seller. So, I reach out to my contacts, you reach out to your contacts, like everyone. Like we have a person who's responsible for sales, but he's only as good as everyone else being able to generate the top of the funnel inbound leads, what I'll call now. And since no one knows who you are, it's basically all hands on deck to try to get as many people as possible that are friendly, that will come in and help you validate whether you have something or not. So at the very beginning, it was, it was basically, all of us here, like seeing if we knew someone that might be interested to talk to someone, our salesperson. Oh, actually, can you pick out who our salesperson is? That'll be an interesting question. Sorry, you might have seen me point in a certain direction.
No,
got the wreath. It's a good guess. I wish he was. That would have been hilarious.
Second on the right, the guy in the vest.
Yes, that's the guy in the vest. That's right. Yeah, that's the guy in the vest. I mean, it's not as obvious. It could have been this guy. I can see that too, but probably none of the others. Just to make a sweeping generalization. There's a certain type, like you got to be upbeat. You have to have this certain kind of demeanor, like charismatic. You got to hire someone who's going to be able to, like take people and make them feel comfortable. And they're probably not going to be as technical as anyone else on your team. If you're building a technology product, right? Like he didn't understand machine learning or like development, but he understood that there's a problem, and he challenged. There's a challenger sale concept, like basically like the customer in ways of like how are you solving this problem today? Basically the usual product discovery questions, but your sales leader is almost your product discovery person there as well. And so that's how you get from 0 to 1. Essentially, you do a lot of product discovery on the fly, a lot of really crappy demos, live failures, definitely rejections, unrealistic expectations. So our first month, we thought we were going to get like, so I joined pre-revenue, pre-customers. Like we had 0 revenue when I joined. Our expectation was first month we're going to get like 20,000 MRR, like 20,000 monthly recurring revenue. We didn't get anywhere close to that until like a year in, I think. So anyway, you just have unrealistic expectations, but you keep trying. That's not a very good answer to your question. I'm sure there's a more technical answer, like how to build the sales deck, how to build the one-pagers, how to build the pitch, how to build the corporate site. But all those, I think, are just necessary prerequisites. They're not sufficient. It's just, I think it's more the understanding that it's going to take a lot of grinding probably for most products.
What about pricing? How do you know the right pricing in the early stages?
Also, great question. Also, it's so there's, I mean, a couple. Competitive analysis. So if there's a solution that's competing with you, what is their pricing? That's often going to be the anchor. So what are you competing against? Maybe that's the question, right? Sometimes it's status quo, which is like I'm using a spreadsheet. I'm not using anything. In that case, maybe you have a bit of an open field on pricing, a little bit more. Sometimes there's another product in the market that's doing this today. And then you have to ask yourself, what's your strategy? Are you going to underprice because you're trying to get as much market share as quickly as possible? Are you going to overprice because you think you have a better solution, right? And so there's a value proposition. But you're kind of already anchored in some way, right? So you can't go in and say, I have a $100,000 solution when everything that kind of looks like you is selling at 10 or 20,000. And so that's somewhere in there. And then this is an undervalued part of innovation. So usually when we talk about innovation, we talk about like technological innovation. I think go-to-market innovation is also really important. So there might be ways in which you can package or bundle or have channel partnerships or other ways in which you take your product to market. That's not just your sales price, but ways in which you're delivering value to the client that you can use to change how much you're selling your product for or how much value you're getting out of it. So at the beginning, it was more in-kind partnerships. So like you don't pay us anything, but you use our product and maybe we'll get your product in return. So there's a number of other startups that we started to use really early on that either we got really low pricing for or it was almost in-kind where it's just other startups supporting startups and you kind of help develop each other and kind of understand the market. And then there was a lot of partnerships and bundling. So if there's, well, for us, it was maybe like a consultant or someone else, like a lawyer that we bundle with the software and that like helps you solve the end-to-end solution. Sure.
I just came in here pretty late, so I'm not even sure if you covered this or not. But what other startups were you involved in? What was the process with that?
You mean as an advisor or as a what? Just career-wise before this?
Career-wise.
Oh, this is my first one that I jumped into. Yeah. So I guess I got pretty lucky there, but yeah. I'm trying to get someone new. Is anyone new? No. Okay. I'll just go back around.
So, based on like my understanding of Fiscal, you guys are more or less kind of like an overarching suite of a variety of services. And you mentioned them being SaaS earlier on. How do you guys kind of position that when you're going to a customer, let's say like a certain government agency? How do they know which service is right for them? Is it more or less they know what they're looking for, or is it that they say, hey, we need this,
right.
How do we get to that?
That's a great question. I mean, it's similar to the previous question, right? Like, how do you know how to bundle or package your products and price them and discover kind of the first set of sales, like who the right customers are? it's a discovery process. That's why your sales staff are in some ways as important as as any other part of the organization. In some ways, a lot more, because they need to. So let me actually back out. There are some products that are very much like a playbook. So like HubSpot is famous for this, like developing a certain playbook where after a certain while, they really honed in on the persona, the buyer persona, the user persona. They have a certain set of questions that everyone can run through. They basically just literally have a playbook, and they hire a bunch of salespeople on. You can run through that playbook, certain answers to questions, like basically know exactly like the titles of the roles that you're targeting, your marketing campaign, who's going to sign up to your website, et cetera. Ours is, like you said, quite different. We're trying to be as good about that as we can, but there's going to be some area. So we have all the way from the top of our marketing funnel to our sales CRM. We know like buyer personas, we know seller personas, we know user personas. We literally have titles for, like, if you look on LinkedIn, like this person is a director of this or VP of that, C of this. Like those are the people that we know correlate to one of our products. Like this is what they would use, and so that's where you start. Like that's where we enter. We say, hey, as a compliance officer, we think that you have this problem. Is that right? And then you basically have a conversation, right? Like how much of that is true? What's the pain point that you're dealing with? What solutions are you using today? And as they expand, you get to learn about the organization. Obviously, our sales staff also does their research, and they look like who is in that organization, how large is that team. If they can get like organizational hierarchies. And so you get the sense of what solutions people might want, and you bring that to the table and say, hey, we think you have a problem in geopolitical market intelligence and understanding what's going on in any part of the world, and in trying to like report on your ESG, right, stuff. And so like we have these two things that we think are valuable. And then not try to like overall pitch them on everything, but really try to figure out like where do you land first, and then see if there's opportunities for a warm introduction to another team in their company that might have similar related challenges for some of the other products. And that way you kind of get it first sale, and then you increase your net retention by being able to upsell over time, right? Cross-sell and upsell. Oh, sure.
Wondering how is like company culture in the beginning, like C to A, how did it grow?
Fantastic.
And so on.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually liken it to the best college project that you've ever worked on. Like the best group of people, like you get together. I'm not going to call anyone out. I don't know any of you. Like sometimes there's like the person who does all the work, and sometimes there's everyone else. This was not like that. This was every single person being the person who does all the work, like 6 to 7 days a week for a long time. So I joined in December. I walked in the door, and then I walked across the street. Our office is in Bethesda. We walked across the street. The then CTO bought me a laptop, went back to my desk, and talked to Tim, the CEO, and I was like, hey, so what's the plan? He was like, well, we're presenting to Data Driven NYC, run by Mac Turk up in New York. He runs this program where like people come and pitch. And I was like, cool. And he was like, hey, it's in 2 weeks. And I was like, cool. And he was like, and you're presenting the topic categorization system. And I was like, okay, what's the topic categorization system? He was like, you're going to build it. And I was like, oh, okay. And so that's the startup, kind of like trial by fire. Basically, I worked on building our first, classification system for like how to classify documents. We went up to New York, basically presented that at Data Driven NYC, and like that was the culture. So I'm not promoting that everyone has to work all the time. That's not the point. The point is that you're buying into the mission, and you want to do what needs to get done to move past the first step. I think there's going to be challenges along the way for sure. So for instance, when I joined, we had a year worth of runway. We just raised our seed. And you could ask, like, aren't you thinking constantly that the fact that you don't have any customers, no revenue, and there is an end of the runway, there's a cliff. But honestly, I don't think that ever come up in any of our minds. Like day to day, we know that the CEO, that's his job. He's thinking about that, the fundraising, other things. We are there to do whatever we can to build a product. So in fact, a couple weeks before our Series A, our funding did fall apart. So we were like 2 weeks out from the end of our runway. Our Series A lead backed out, and we were kind of left with nothing. So we got together in the kitchen. I think it was like 20 people, maybe less. Went around the room, and we were like, okay, are you committed to staying here without pay for whatever foreseeable future while we go raise a round? And everyone said yes. We all bought in. Tim went out. In a couple months, I think we got the and the lead back in, and then then went on to our business. Now, I don't think that would be possible now, right? Like, you don't have that kind of culture as you grow. Like, I'm sure if that happened to Stripe and they said, hey, we're not going to pay you all for a couple months, are you cool? No, of course not. But that's the culture that you have at the beginning, which is really special. Sure.
In the beginning, do you have I guess a regular job and then you join a startup, or you just joined it right out of school, and how did you manage that?
I wouldn't even count a PhD as a regular job. That's what I had before I had graduate school. No, I just joined straight up here. This was it. No, I mean, yeah, there was nothing as a safety net outside. Yeah.
So 2013 seems kind of significant to me, since it's the year after AlexNet, and public training data is, large public training data is only just getting started. So what was it like building a machine learning enabled product that was valuable enough to customers in those early days of really big models? And what advice would you have for machine learning enabled startups today, now that public training data is easy to get, but the compute to use it, or a large enough data set to make it quality enough is hard?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the problem you're solving. So I'm going to maybe annoyingly always take the side of what's the problem you're solving as opposed to how you're solving it. So for us, 2013, 15 was predictive analytics was hot. You could basically get fundraising saying we're doing predictive analytics on something. I think that, as you probably saw in the last couple years, saying you're doing something with AI is hot. You get funding by saying we're solving X problem with AI. And there's a huge wave of those that crashed because they didn't actually solve the problem. So I don't know if you're familiar with X.AI, which is a assistant for scheduling. No, I like that I'm seeing a lot of blank stares because it was really cool and popular for a little while there. But so there's this wave of companies, right? They think that they can ride a certain technology on a certain path. I think GPT is honestly that right now, right? You have a certain set of startups that are going to start and solve a certain problem with GPT, and there can either be quickly consolidated and eaten up, and maybe that's the goal. The goal might be that you get acquired in a year. There's nothing that says you have to build a sustaining company. A lot of companies actually don't. So a lot of early stage AI companies that I know, the goal was basically to pack in a few people, have a veneer of something that they're interested in doing, not really trying to build that, but they want to get acqui-hired somewhere, like Google or DeepMind or whatever it is. And they can be quite successful that way. So if that's what you're going for, there's one path. I think the challenge for us was that our clients, the problem we were solving, were not comfortable with AI. So that's the timing aspect. So in finance and marketing, others, there's been a wave of, it's very normal to be data-driven in the decisions you're making on where you're allocating marketing dollars. That is not the case in legal tech and reg tech and the place that we play. So maybe you could argue it's a risk-reward kind of decision. These decisions are a lot riskier. So a legal decision, medical decision is a lot riskier. And so the confidence you have to have in your AI is much higher than Netflix recommending the movie you're going to watch, right? The disparity is there. So that's, I guess, one answer is identifying how accepting your market is of AI in the product. The second is what's changed a lot is how evident it is that you're using AI. So it used to be you used to have to, or you wanted to call it out, this is the machine learning feature, or this is the recommendation. I guess it's kind of coming like that now with everyone coming out with something AI with GPT powered. But I would still argue it's under the hood. People aren't you're not throwing it in their face that this is AI. The user experience is very seamless. You're hiding most of the complexity under the hood. You're not putting out a bunch of weights and factors and graphs and charts. It's just a very seamless, natural human experience that people are interacting with in most places. And I think that's the big difference. AI is just a tool, right? So the same way there's no call out to we use X database or we use X JavaScript framework. I assume fairly soon there's not going to be a call out to we're using AI for this thing. It's just going to be assumed. Obviously you have to use AI to do the thing you're doing, a recommendation engine. No one assumes people are manually trying to match up what's the best item to recommend. And so I guess the last thing is just look at what's available now, what's capable, you're capable of doing with AI. And what is the problem set that you could solve with that? What pain point would people have that you would solve with that? that's probably the best way to approach it. It doesn't really change, like from now to then. It's just availability of the space has expanded quite a bit. What do we have?
Do you think it's important now, like touching on your last question, for companies to call out the fact that they're using AI or to choose methods of using AI where it's clear to the consumers?
I think we're in an interesting time for that. I suspect the answer is going to change. So, and I think it's going to depend on the kind of use cases that we're talking about. So again, low risk to high risk is probably the one axis I go to. So I suspect there's going to be more regulation around explicitly calling out when you're using AI for credit monitoring, for recidivism, for like health-related decisions in the judicial system. And I suspect it's probably going to be less interesting or needed to call it out for like everyday common tasks like interacting with your phone or something like that. So it's hard to answer in general. I suspect there's going to be kind of almost a bifurcation for a period of time, and I don't know how much that's going to last either. Sure. Yeah, let's see you. Oh, sorry, I keep ignoring you in the back.
No, I'm sorry. I was just checking my
No, there's the other guy back. Are you stretching as well, or are you asking?
No, I had a question, yeah.
No. Yeah.
You've been doing this for a long time, right? Like, when was there a time that you wanted to quit? Like, why? And like, what kept you going, right?
That's
It's a long timeline to be doing it.
It's a good question. Sometimes I measure how long I've been here by how many classes have graduated from college since I started. So you're the second and a half class that has graduated. Like someone came in completely 4 years out, then another 4 years out, and then you guys are halfway through. Which is a fucking long time. I agree. So I think the two things, maybe more, that keep me here, and absolutely, yes, there are times when I wanted to do something else. I think the things that keep me here are the mix of chaos and order, if that makes sense. And what I mean is we've evolved almost every 3 months to be somewhat different from we were as a company before. And I'm constantly exposed to new people, new products, new customers, new challenges, and new learning. And that is very interesting to me, because the question is, why would I leave, right? Like, what's the opportunity cost of doing something else? It's to get exposure to a different opportunity that levels me up a bit more. At least that's what drives me, like exposure, testing myself in ways that I haven't. I get that here, like the constant leveling challenges. So I didn't come in expecting or wanting to be a CTO. Like I came in expecting to work on cool problems, solving stuff with AI. After a while, I got asked, like, hey, can you lead this other team? And then I didn't say no. And then I asked, can I do this other thing? I didn't say no. And here I am, basically. We were searching for a CTO, and then the CEO asked, hey, do you want to just do this? And I didn't say no. And so that's maybe a career lesson, or maybe not. It's maybe a lesson you should say no sometimes. But I guess the opportunity was challenging in each of those cases. When I didn't seek it explicitly. And I guess the other reason I stay here is I still feel like there's so much to do. Like it doesn't feel like we're actually accomplishing what I came here to do yet, which is kind of the Facebook 1% thing, like we're 1% done. And partly to other people's questions, like maybe it's because we just have this fucking backlog that we can't get to, and I keep wanting to certain things that I want to get to. But yeah, no, it's interesting that there's a lot of challenges. You just have to keep kind of focused on, is this still the right place for me? Am I learning? Am I growing? And the answer has been yes for me most of the time. Obviously, all the time, I'm still here. Sure.
In the early stages, you said like everyone was doing everything. So at what point do you start delegating your work to someone else, like in the hiring process?
Yeah. Well, I guess I hit on that a little bit by saying like there's constantly like, can you do this other thing? And then I didn't say no. What's implied by that is that we are adding spans and layers to the organization. And so, I mean, there's a lot written on this. One of the hard parts at the beginning is you're wearing a lot of hats. So not everyone is doing everything, but everyone wears a lot of hats. And the expectation is, and this is the biggest difference I see between what I'll call an entrepreneur, but what I mean is like someone who's a founder and someone who's an employee. And this applies to early employees as well. You look around, you see a problem, and you don't ask like, hey, is it my responsibility to fix it? Like you just start doing something to fix it. Like that's the founder mentality. As you grow, you can't do that for everything. You basically have to start designating people who are responsible for certain things. The mistake that we've made, and I feel like everyone makes, is you kind of overcorrect and you start to over-establish process for how to do certain things. If something is broken, okay, like everyone jumps on it. That doesn't work. You can't have 5 people doing it at the same time. Let's have a process. It should go through this. And then things get calcified a bit too much, and you kind of like swing back and forth. And so I think the challenge is identifying as early as possible after it's too late that you're handling too much, that there's too much process in some way, or like you're putting too much on yourself, and that there's a role that should be established around this area or like this other function that didn't exist before, and that like it's preventing the organization from succeeding. Like you are a blocker. Like I'm a blocker because, so I've code still running in production, which my team hates me for. But I haven't actively been involved in developing for, I would say, I'm going to make up a number, 6 years. Like I realized 6 years ago that me being a part of a sprint and having tickets assigned to me is just a complete blocker for the team. Like I'm going to get pulled into 10 meetings in that day. I'm not going to have any time to work on this ticket. And so like it was just, even though I wanted to, right, like I'm still interested in the work, I can't do it. And so I have to delegate it. And so that was me realizing probably too late, but like there's some things proactively I recognized. This is, I think some guys at Amazon said this before, but like when you're starting out, the main question is what you're doing. So like you're focusing on, like if you're an individual contributor, what am I working on? Like you have a project. You grow a little bit and it becomes how. So you have a team, you kind of focus on the processes, how things are working together. You're building kind of a culture and a structure. And then at the higher levels, you start to go to who. So who is actually working on these things? So my most important role oftentimes is growing the next set of leaders and identifying who are the right people to take on the more strategic projects, and then handing that off to them to actually figure out the how and the what. And kind of being involved to the extent that I need to, but really trying to empower people to grow to the next level, to feel like they are owning their own success and understanding. So my job now that I've grown to, and again, you could ask, how do you get comfortable with this? Because I think this is the challenge for most people transitioning to individual contributor to managers, being comfortable that I am not impacting the organization independently with my work. Like I'm not shipping product. My greatest impact is in making a very clear mission for the other parts of my, like basically my team, so they understand why we're doing something, and they have that intent in mind, and they feel empowered to actually go and do things. And so I'm acting through people, right? And that's the biggest challenge.
So you said that you like to look at people who might be leaders in the future. Right? So what are some skills or some like innate qualities that you look at for people to kind of delegate them to more strategic roles?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer in general because everyone has different styles, like personality styles, interaction styles. I wouldn't discount anyone on their ability to be a leader based off of their style, right? So it'd be, I guess the first answer part is it's going to be tailored to the individual that I want to promote in certain ways. But the kind of the more generic answer is I always hire for culture over skill and experience. So and what I mean by that is culture is very fuzzy. It's that desire to want to learn and grow, to interact, to have an opinion that you hold strongly, but be very comfortable changing it if you hear evidence to the contrary. To be comfortable in ambiguity, to be empathetic. So like these skill sets are just more and more valuable, especially as technology takes over more of the other stuff. It's, people come from different places. Some people are not comfortable in public speaking, and I want to grow them in that way. Some people are not comfortable in having ideas challenged, not feeling that they're personally attacked, right? And you want to make sure they're comfortable in that way. But I think that, the best leaders just understand the people they're working with and can translate the ways that each person is going to need to hear things and then kind of drive things forward. I definitely think leadership being learned, like nurtured. It's going to be different for different people. Certain people have a better knack to be charismatic, but that's not necessarily a great leader. Like, I think a great leader just it doesn't inspire confidence in themselves. It inspires confidence in you when you're talking to that person. Like you can do what you should be able to do. Yes. Yeah.
You know, as someone who has a background with a PhD in artificial intelligence, run a company, about your values on proprietary algorithms, what do you think of these new companies that are going to come out where really they are just a wrapper on GPT? Do you see like long-term potential for that? Is it sustainable? And what's your opinion on that?
I think it's great. I mean, I think any company that's trying to do something and finds like a market, like I'm not the arbiter of that. Like if you have a bunch of customers and they're willing to pay you money, fantastic, like good for you. I don't think it's cheating in any way to just be a wrapper around something. I think that plenty of companies were wrappers around things until you know, like at whatever point in time, like you could say like, oh, X is just wrapping around Y. I think that the problem, and I think you're alluding to this, is that that's not very defensible. That's not the moat. You can't really build a sustained business over that. You might be able to get quick revenue, and maybe you can sell the company to someone else, and maybe that's your intent, right? Again, like your outcome, if that's your outcome, that's great. But you're gonna have to, if you're just a wrapper around, and I say just a wrapper around GPT, you're gonna have to do something else. But I'll point to the open source community. So if you're familiar with Apache projects, I mean, Databricks was just a wrapper around Spark, and Airflow, Astronomer is just a wrapper around Airflow, and Confluent is just a wrapper around Kafka. But you basically grow to, all of them are kind of growing other managed services that make it easier to use the tool. So I see the same evolution probably for GPT, but any other family of models in that way, that there's things that early adopters can do for themselves, like you guys can all probably hook up to GPT and do some stuff. Most of the people at most companies can't do that. And so for a number of reasons, it's skill, it's reliability, it's having an SLA, it's having someone who else can kind of take over other projects. It's whatever. There's a business that you can have just by managing the interaction with GPT. There's governance implications. So like for most enterprises, they'll want to have some governance rails on like what can and cannot be a prompt, or what can come out and how to do that. Again, OpenAI can build that in which case that whole company's business goes away. That's the hurdle, right? But if they don't, there's like saving prompts and keeping a record of them, having a data catalog. There's all these like services that grow around any underlying technology, even if it's open sourced. And as Databricks shows, like you can have a very successful company even with open source technology. Like they're constantly open sourcing stuff from what they do, but they're still very valuable because you want to use the things that they're actually providing. It's easier to use them than to do your own. So maybe that's the underlying thing is if those companies actually make it easier to do things with GPT and are solving like a problem with how you do it, then I think they can stay around. But it's so hard to tell right now. Like there's so many popping up. I feel like maybe in a year it'll be hopefully easier to see like what's real and what's not.
All right, so you kind of like touched on previously about how your format for like organized and running sprints and works, but specifically like in your early days, how did you like yourself organize and teammates on tasks?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you have like teammates who are giving you features before you need to go pitch them in like a week in the R.
Sure. I mean, at the very early stages, you're all in a room. At least we used to be. I mean, even if you're distributed, it's a virtual room. Like, you basically have a board. Either it's like an Asana board or Trello or whatever it is, a virtual whiteboard. And like, we had literally like notepad tickets on like, here we're doing these things. It's like, again, it's like Jira or Trello, but in a real form. And there's just so few of you that you have essentially, we had a company-wide stand-up every morning, but it's really just like 10 people, right? And like just like go around the circle and say, here, this is what everyone's doing today. And it's so easy to stay aligned. Like you just immediately know when something else becomes a priority. Like there's no extra communication you need. So that's actually the easier part, I think, at the beginning when everyone is like super tight. It becomes harder when you start to grow a little bit and the team starts to splinter, and like now there's competing priorities and tracking which ones actually should take priority, where the dependence, like that becomes a bit harder. That's where you start introducing, like, we didn't have a product manager for the first, like, I don't know, 2-3 years. We didn't need one because there's product managers and there's product management. And every engineer can wear a hat that's a product management hat. And like they know, because they see the customer, they interact with them personally, what the problems are and like what they should do. Once you start adding another abstraction layer where engineers are not talking to the customer, that's a growth point you need, because you can't have every engineer talking to every customer. But then you have to have a communication path where like product managers are doing certain things and writing user stories and then putting them in a set of backlogs, and then engineers score them. Like, I don't like process that much. I'm quite disorganized actually. So I like the minimal amount of process that's going to get you the end result. Like, I'll go back to like the intent. Like my main job is make sure people are clear on why we're doing something, and then they'll figure out and self-organize on how they're going to do it. I think mistakes we made when we organized like overly processed stuff, like we're very clear, and I think we've tried to roll back as much as we can. I don't know if that answers your question, but essentially it's kind of an evolving thing. Like the companies I work with now, they use Notion, they use Linear, they use essentially another, like whatever the current set of startups is now, like to just have notes, meet every day on Slack, on Zoom calls, and then just kind of like make sure that, we didn't talk about the coding part. The code is trash at the beginning mostly, and so you're going to throw a lot of it out. The challenge is making sure it's just like not too much trash all at once from everybody, and so there's some give and take there. Sure.
Just retouching on the coding part, what do you think looking back now, like you would tell yourself in terms of like the whole coding aspect of it?
Yeah, I think that just acknowledge it's going to be trash, and that's okay. Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have, as soon as you write code, I mean, this is a trope, there's tech debt immediately as soon as it's launched into production. I think we were pretty good about this actually. Like, Andreessen says, like if you're not embarrassed by the product you ship, you waited too long. Like, I don't think we had that problem. Luckily, we avoided that one. We were always embarrassed by the product we ship. I think it was, I don't know. I think it was actually 4 or 5 years before Tim and I, our CEO, were on a demo, and it worked, like end to end. Nothing was weird. And I remember because we looked at each other and it was like, oh, it worked. Like, and up until then, like there's constantly like bugs in all these places. But that's okay. Like, you just be okay with that. Like, I think again it comes back to prioritization. I think we could talk about like organizational principles. Like when you're one person, you kind of organize your code as you want it. Back to some other questions about what do I look for in startups. I'm very wary if there's one developer that's developed the whole code base for like 5 to 10 years. There's so many bodies buried in there that as soon as he leaves, like we better have a very good retention package for him or her, because we're never going to be able to run this thing if they go. So yeah, like if it's one person at the beginning, you're going to do whatever it is. Second person comes in, you start to kind of like develop in parallel, and then like there's a point when you're going to have to take a step back and it's going to slow you down, but they have to actually like write packages together, like actual like whatever code base you're using, and like use some sort of like package system. Obviously you're using Git and other things already, but it has to come together in some way that people actually can compound the value of each other's code, as opposed to having like 2 functions doing the same thing and that they've written in their own ways. And again, it's going to happen. At some point you're going to have to combine it, and then like they evolve again. And so then you start to build in more of these like processes and like CI/CD, and how do you automate some of the like deploy processes. And like now would be, for instance, we did not use Docker. That was not a common thing. Like containerization and other things certainly would now. Like the way we would build it now would be totally different. But I couldn't go back and tell myself that those technologies didn't exist. But if I was building it today, if that was the question, absolutely, it would be very different code base and structure than what we had today. Like we're running bare metal on EC2 instances. I would not do that at all today.
We're right at time.
Oh, okay.
So let's just add the last name and everything, but like I'm sure you all can keep talking afterwards. But I just want to make sure you know.
Okay. Cool. Bye, live stream. Yeah, I'm cool to stay around.